Coming up on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Corn is clearly a valuable part of the diet for many beef cattle. Today, we'll tell you why beef producers and corn growers are now working more closely together, aiming to build the sustainability of both of these agricultural commodities.
And now, NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Kevin Ochsner. It probably doesn't have to be said, but corn has long played an important role as a feedstuff for cattle. As a result, there's a close relationship between corn growers and cattle producers. In fact, many people around the country make a living growing both corn and cattle on their operations. Today, we're going to dig into the complementary relationship between corn and cattle and discuss some of the common challenges, opportunities, and some of the trends we can anticipate in the future. Today, we're joined by a great panel of experts who will share their insights on a variety of topics. Our first panelist is Dr. Galen Erickson. He's a ruminant nutritionist from the University of Nebraska. Next is Kylie Geffert, a Kansas farmer who raises both corn and beef cattle on her operation. Alongside Kylie, we have Kevin Ross, a sixth-generation farmer from Iowa who also serves as president of the National Corn Growers Association. Our final panelist is Mike Drenin of Drenin Feed Yards. He's our host, and he'll tell us just a little bit more about his operation now. So Mike, thanks for having us join you here in this multi-generational feed yard. Tell us a little bit about your feeding and farming operation.
Well, thanks a lot, Kevin. Sure appreciate it. And we're glad to have you here in Palmer, Nebraska.
Yeah.
This is one of our two facilities that we operate. It's all family owned and run. Third generation from both my sons, Sam and Jared. And our capacity between both yards is right at 13,000. So, and you know, corn is a big part. You know, we buy in both feed yards probably about 80% of our corn. So it's a very important part of it, and sure glad to have everybody here.
Well, we are glad to be here. We've got a beautiful facility here and a nice day you created for us.
You know, it's that way in Nebraska all the time. So,
well, you talk about how much corn is fed here, but Kevin, I'm curious, from a broad nationwide basis, how much corn goes into the feeding of cattle across the country?
Yeah, in the cattle feeding industry, it's about 1.9 billion bushels total of corn that's fed, and 1.25 in the beef cattle industry alone. So a huge part of of the corn market in general across the entire nation.
Yeah. And Kylie, you grow both corn and cattle on your operation. What's the value that's created for both industry, both corn and cattle, in terms of this complementary relationship?
So 1 out of every 4 bushel that is for corn and beef is for beef and pork exports. And there's also a $5.7 billion that they help with.
Pretty significant, isn't it? Yeah. And Dr. Erickson, you've spent your life's work focusing on the nutrition of these ruminant animals. Clearly there are some benefits, both from a performance standpoint, obviously from a meat quality standpoint as well, of feeding corn to cattle. Tell us about some of those.
Yeah, for sure. The biggest first thing that comes to mind is the taste, tenderness, and juiciness of beef when fed corn-based diets. Secondly, we feed corn and the corn byproducts as an energy source to the cattle, and so the more energy that goes in, the faster the rate of gains are, and the more efficient they are. And that really plays into the U.S. beef system because we're the most efficient beef production system in the world. And a big part of that is because we finish these cattle in feed yards and obviously make them of the size that we are accustomed to here in the U.S. So there's a lot of benefits. I'd also point out that we use a lot of other plant parts from the corn, so you can put up corn silage or use the residue, and so we certainly try to capitalize on the feedstock that's being produced.
So Kylie, in terms of a corn grower, how much are you thinking about the end user and specifically cattle producers or cattle feeders when you're making management decisions and growing that corn crop?
So we make a lot of decisions. We want the best for them. We need the beef industry as much as they need the corn industry. So we really need each other.
Kevin, I might add that one of the things that's unique with corn producers making decisions is when to harvest and how we process that corn. So I think when you have an integrated system, whether that's your own operation or your neighbors that you're working with, you got to make sure you decide, are you going to harvest dry corn, high moisture corn, maybe even corn silage. So I think there's a lot of decisions on that end user when you plant your crop. Am I going to go to town with that, or am I going to work with the neighboring feed yard?
Yeah, one of the beauties about corn in general is that it's such a versatile crop, and especially when it comes to feeding animals in general, but the beef cattle especially, it's used so many different ways, and so that versatility, all gets back down to what you see in the meat counter later on, and seeing that great, highly well marbled beef, and ends up with the best flavor in the world.
Absolutely. And you use a lot of corn in both these feed yards, right, Mike?
You bet we do. And I'll tell you, the big part about it is that when you get into different regions, and with the farmers, there may be more hay grown in different regions where you can use that as your roughage. But we get in our other yard in Columbus, normally we'll put up silage there, where here we use alfalfa hay. And we talk about corn producers, obviously, with all the corn that we buy. There's also, with silage, if somebody needs to cut some, if they've got some dry land that was damaged, and it's feed that we can use and help them, and so we help each other. And the same thing with corn stover. Some of that is put up in bales, and we're able to grind that and feed that to the cattle. So many things that we work together with.
No doubt, two very, very complementary industries.
Yep.
Still ahead, we'll dive into the sustainability of both beef and corn production and have our experts share their thoughts on this important topic. Stay with us. We've got a lot more to discuss when we return.
What does it mean to be dependable? It means you do what you say you'll do time and time again. Because performance isn't optional, and your task is essential. For over 95 years, we have proven ourselves to be the most dependable choice. That's why the cattlemen of this great nation trust Ritchie to provide fresh water on demand. Ritchie, proud to be a partner to the American Cattlemen since 1921.
CattleCon 2021 is back in the Music City. Tune in to Tennessee for the cattle industry's biggest convention, with education, networking, and fun, not to mention some great tunes. Plus, you can check out the huge NCBA trade show, outstanding entertainment, and much, much more. So make your plans and be there for CattleCon 2021, February 3rd through the 5th. Stay tuned to convention.ncba.org for all the details.
Welcome back. We're coming to you today from Drenin feedlots in Nebraska to talk about the relationship between the corn and beef industries. And one important topic that we all hear a lot about in the press today is sustainability. And I'm curious, let's talk about that in terms of what it means to the beef industry and the corn industry both. Mike, what would you say?
You just look at a lot of things today. I mean, if you go back to like 1977, we're producing the same amount of beef on 33% less cattle. And so you just look at those type of things on sustainability, and it's something that we as producers do every day, and it's part of our operation. But it's good that we get out and we start explaining what we do to all the consumers and our customers.
Sustainability a big issue in the corn industry?
Absolutely it is. We've been working on just ways to improve crop performance and sustainability across the board in the corn industry for a number of years, and really for us that means keeping profitability is such a key piece of that, and also just making sure that it's there for the next generation. Most of the farms that we're on, including the feedlot here, are multi-generational, and sustainability for us means that's going to be there for years to come and able to be utilized for corn production for a long time down the road.
That's great. Kylie, what would you add?
Yeah, I think they both have really great points. We have to keep educating and bridging the gap between consumers.
That's great.
There's a host of specific management things that are adopted that make good sense from an improved efficiency standpoint, but every one of those management decisions that improve efficiency allow us to raise more beef on less resources. And And as Mike alluded, that we've been doing that for a long time in both industries, in the corn and beef industry. You know, I look at ways we can improve grazing strategies, ways we can harvest more sunlight with grass and with corn production as real key issues for us to improve sustainability. A lot of producers are interested in what are feed additives that can help this issue, particularly related to methane. So I think there's a host of management strategies that are going to be adopted, if they haven't already, that ultimately improve the sustainability picture for beef and ultimately also then for corn. And I would also add, anything that corn producers do to improve their sustainability helps tremendously in the beef industry, because, for instance, on water, 98% of our water footprint for beef is related to feed production issues. And so, if, for example, any sustainability improvements we make on water use efficiency in the corn production system has a trickle-down effect to improve the water sustainability for beef.
Well, and I want to follow up on that thought process a little bit, because you said an important word, more with less, right? And you mentioned it in your conversation, Mike, but I'm curious, what are some of the things that farmers and ranchers are doing to reduce the overall environmental footprint of both the corn and beef industry? Let's talk corn first.
Yeah, so for the corn industry, a lot of things that we're doing are reduced tillage or no-till practices. We're learning more about the soil every day. You're seeing, you know, more corn, again, higher efficiencies with corn and corn production, whether it's water usage or just production, you know, increases in general. So you're growing more product on less acres. Sure. But as well, like I said, soil health in general is something that we focus on a lot. The National Corn and the Soil Health Partnership, we continue to look at these, you know, ways to improve our sustainability footprint every day. Some of the things that we work with Cattlemen, our Cattlemen to Cattlemen education series, or excuse me, our Cattlemen's education series. That,
I like Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
but you know, that's one of the things that we do with NCBA. Make sure that the cattlemen in different states understand the things that are going on in the corn world, so that you know, we can talk together more collectively about what happens moving forward. We've also got our Corn Sustainability Advisory Group, which is something that brings in folks from different industries as well as growers, just to talk about how, you know, it all comes together, whether it's you know, the university data or on-farm data, and really what's going on out there in the world in the on-farm locations.
Mike, multi-generational operation here. What are some things you all have done over the years to reduce your environmental footprint in producing beef cattle?
Most of all, a lot of the things that we do, and we get a tremendous amount of help from the university with Galen's department there, and a lot of things on just the efficiencies of using these products. You know, how do we process those? How do we put those into a ration that makes the most efficient use of it? We look at so many things. I mean, the efficiencies and the sustainability is what we do every day, because it just makes, everything makes a difference. And because the comfort of these cattle right here in these pens, that's so critical. And so then you have a constant amount of work that you're doing in pens, make the comfort for them. We design everything for that with shades in the summer and windbreaks and things like that. But all makes sense, and so we do this every day. It's the little details that you worry about and that you work on every day, and every feed yard does the same. And we just got to do them every day, day in, day out, and it makes a difference. You save some time here. You can look at computer systems that we're using within our feeding systems here. They can save up to, you know, at least a half hour a day on just some of the things that we do. And so you look at that as that's that much less fuel burning, sure, things like that. And, you know, you look at a yard of our size, just in that amount, I mean, that's $30,000 to $40,000 worth of savings just on that.
Dr. Erickson, you work with organizations and feed yards all over the state. What are some of the biggest areas you see as opportunities to reduce the environmental footprint?
Well, I think that ways to process feeds, feed choices, utilizing byproducts that are local to that area. For instance, in the Panhandle, we use a lot of beet pulp, which is a great way to recycle fibrous feeds. And so I think we look at complementing byproducts that normally wouldn't be used for human edible food production, and yet we're producing a human edible food at the end. Additionally, I think people look at what are feed additives that may be either available today or coming in the near future that will assist us in decreasing, at least from a gaseous emission standpoint, some of the methane footprint. So I think there's a host of things coming down the pike, so to speak. But I think that we have to continue to focus on it using research data and come up with new strategies. But the beef industry, the producers have done a good job of implementing most of those strategies to date already and improved the footprint dramatically in the last 50 years.
So I'm curious, how are beef and corn organizations working together to educate producers on some of the innovative practices they can utilize to improve the sustainability? From a beef standpoint, what do you see happening, Mike?
Well, the National Cattlemen's Association and Nebraska Cattlemen are part of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Sure. And that's really been very interesting where I've been part of that. Within that group, we've worked on the field to market and feed sustainabilities and things like that. And so it's been very educational for myself. And really what the big part of that is it gives us a chance to really look at what other things we can do to even be more efficient. Mm-hmm. And as we look at that, all those things that we do within sustainability come back to what we're trying to get done here in the feed yard is produce the best beef in the world. Mm-hmm. And we try to do it at the least cost that we can do that. And I'll tell you, that's been a big part of this, and it's really made a big difference. And again, like I said earlier, it's you got to get out and say this, and that was part of that. And we're part of this now, where we can talk to some of these people and that go through some of these things and show them our story. And actually, we had an opportunity here last year by hosting the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainability out here in right at this feed yard. Wow. What a great opportunity to have those people, and we can tell our story, and then they can ask their questions specific to, what we do every day, and really explain that.
Let's talk corn. You had mentioned some educational programs you have. Tell us more about those.
Yeah, absolutely. So the partnership with NCBA on the Cattlemen's Education Series, it's something that we get a chance to go to a lot of the state meetings across the U.S. and different cattlemen's associations, and have a chance to have that conversation about what corn is doing, in the sustainability arena, or other things that we can talk about together. And we've also been a part of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef too, and had input in there. But anything that we do at corn, when we're talking about efficiencies as well, it all translates into the efficiency of the beef process too. So we understand the importance, and that's why we work together.
Kylie, let's talk consumers for a minute. I mean, the word sustainability is becoming such an important buzzword with consumers. Why is it important that we share that message that Mike was talking about with our consumers of how we're becoming more sustainable in both the beef and corn industries?
So people are wanting to know where their food comes from. They want to know the farmer's story. They want to know the rancher's story. So that is really how we are trying to share the message. That's why we share things. That's why we're putting out educational stuff on the corn side. We are trying to tell the stories for the farmers and ranchers.
So I'm curious, let's just be honest. How strong a sustainability story do we have for the beef and corn industries? You want to start with the corn industry?
I think it's extremely strong. In general, again, we continuously try to improve, and that's just one thing that farmers with their own businesses inherently do. In any other business you're going to run, you're trying to create efficiencies and trying to, make sure you're taking that extra step. I think, right now farmers are doing a lot of different things with cover crops, no-till. Again, we're looking at different technologies within the equipment that all helps us become more efficient. Lots of different things that just continue to stack up, and every year it's something different that I think we're able to add to the toolbox to make sure that we continually are improving the sustainability of the corn grower.
And how about the beef industry? What does our sustainability story look like, Dr. Erickson?
Well, Kevin, I'm super excited because I think that for years we've probably been a little anxious about this issue and the beef side, and probably taken some, maybe at times, too much heat on this issue. And there's a tremendous amount of excitement because I think we have some really good news to share in that regard. And every cattle producer in the country should be aware of those statistics and be able to address this issue and not be afraid of it. First and foremost, produce 18% of the world's beef with 8% of the cattle in the world.
Incredible.
And when I talk about that relative to other countries, I think that's the perfect amount of evidence that we are the most efficient and therefore the most sustainable system in the world if you're going to consume beef, which hopefully everybody does. Secondly, when we talk about specifically the synergy between corn and cattle, by using grain and high energy diets here at the grain and grain byproducts, high energy diets here at the end of the feeding period or end of their life cycle, we dramatically increase growth rate, feed utilization, and size of those cattle when they go to market. And so when you look at sustainability from the standpoint of amount of beef produced per cow exposed, and everybody hopefully understands what cow exposed means,
Right.
we're the best in the world, and I think that's a tremendous story. I think you can also then go through the litany of concerns that are specific that some people have: land use, water, energy use, and then methane. And by utilization of grain and grain byproducts in the feeding period, we improve all of those statistics by at least 50%, in some cases 2 or 3 times better in that sustainability picture. So I don't want to forget that we have a lot of land that is used for grass production across the U.S. And frankly, that's the intended purpose of that land. That's what it should be used for. How else better can we utilize that than to graze cattle? But we also then want to put the finishing touches on those cattle, which really dramatically improves our system. The last comment I would make is people think about methane and they think, oh, that's terrible news. I think there's some really exciting developments in that arena as well. We're learning, mostly from atmospheric scientists, not even beef cattle focused into researchers, that this methane story is different than what's been told. It doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, and frankly, it's been produced forever by ruminants, maybe not cattle, but forever by ruminants. And anything we do then to increase feed utilization, anything we do like feeding corn, which will cut the methane production, anything we do then that makes that methane that's expelled naturally by cattle go down will have dramatic impacts on what's concentrated in the atmosphere. So I think there's some exciting news coming in that regard, and the beef industry should get behind that.
Go ahead.
You know, Kevin, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about corn and the sustainability aspects we bring with the ethanol process as well, and really how we get to all these byproducts that Dr. Erickson is talking about. A lot of these have come about really in the last, 15, 20 plus years where Mike's feeding a lot of dry distillers grains or wet distillers here on the feedlot here. All these are through the process or coming out of the ethanol process, where 30% of the corn across the U.S. roughly is using the ethanol production right now and creating a great fuel. But on the other hand, it's creating an absolutely fantastic feed product that's coming here to, a lot of it goes to the cattle industry. And as we talk about that from a, big picture scenario from sustainability, it's bringing a high quality protein into here. It's also bringing, other feedstuffs, like you say, when you talk about corn, the syrups that we've got, we're feeding to some of our cattle on the farm, and the oil out of that process as well. So just different pieces that we didn't really have a whole lot of this market, too many years ago. Now 98% of the distillers across the U.S. are coming out of coming out of ethanol plants, and the other 2% is coming out of where they make our good whiskey. But
and they're using some of that for cattle too.
That's going to cattle as well. So either way, this it's absolutely great products, and they really go hand in hand with the entire picture for sustainability between corn and cattle.
It doesn't have to be a feed versus fuel question. It can be feed and fuel.
Right. I mean, it's a big part of it. I mean, it's just like what Kevin is talking about. I mean, when we get into the wet distillers and things like that, I mean, you look at those efficiencies, and the energy of that product. And when the ethanol industry came in, it changed a lot of things, but we learned how we could coexist throughout this whole process. And if you look at the beef animal, just like what Galen was talking about, it's a little over 80% of their lifespan is spent on forages, on grass, on things like that cannot be eaten by humans or things like that. But only 20% of that time when we get them here, and then we finish that. That's where the efficiencies are, and that's where the corn and the byproducts, and they all come together.
Creating that great Nebraska corn-fed beef that everybody loves, right?
You know it. It's the best in the world.
That's right. Well, this is a great conversation. And if you'd like to learn more about the National Corn Growers Association and its efforts to drive demand for corn growers, just visit their website at ncga.com. And to keep up to date on beef sustainability efforts and other key issues, visit the website ncba.org. Still to come on Cattlemen to Cattlemen, we'll take a closer look at ethanol and DDGs and the important role they both play in the corn and beef industries. Don't go away. We'll have more right after this.
At Case IH, we believe it's our job to provide you with solutions. That's why our Farmall and Maxim tractors, as well as our tools and attachments, are designed with you in mind. From mowing to baling to loading and more, we're here to help turn your to-dos into to-dones. At Case IH, we'll keep your days running smoothly with equipment that's durable, versatile, and highly efficient. No wonder farmers are more loyal to Case IH than any other brand. Visit your local dealer or go to caseih.com/livestock for more.
Welcome back to this special edition of Cattlemen to Cattlemen as we talk with a group of experts about the relationship between corn and cattle. You know, we've talked a lot about corn and corn byproducts, and Galen, I'd like to begin with you. Tell us about the nutritional differences between corn itself and distillers grains.
Yeah, we've learned a lot about use of distillers grains, even though it's not a new feed, because we've been feeding a lot from whiskey plants for hundreds of years. But there's a lot of new things that are happening today. But a lot of beef producers, I think, are surprised that you can take corn, take out the starch, which is what we've been used to feeding it for from an energy standpoint, to make it into ethanol, and yet get a feed out that's good for the cattle. So we've done a lot of research, and in fact I have a mentor and colleague, Terry Kloffenstein at the University of Nebraska, who's been around for 60 years doing research. He says the biggest thing he's seen that's changed at least Nebraska's beef industry in his career. And so we've done a lot of research. A lot of producers are feeding distillers. In fact, I would argue almost all here in the state of Nebraska. And it's an excellent feed. You know, we look at it as a protein source, works great. In fact, it has the right kind of protein for younger, lighter background in cattle because it's high in what we call bypass protein. And we think it's by far the most economical source of that type of protein if you need that in your operation. But on the feedlot side, in the feed yard sector, it has more energy than corn that you're replacing. So we've looked at titrating levels, and you know, we think that if it's priced competitive to corn, frankly, you're foolish at your operation not to be feeding at least 20-30%, and that's on a dry basis. Wow. So if you're feeding wet distillers grains, that might be half or more of your diet on an as-is basis. But it all depends on the price competitiveness, which is varied over time. But we certainly know how it feeds, and we know what its energy values are, and done a lot of testing with it.
And there's a new generation of DDGs, is that right, Kylie?
Yeah, so the benefits of those, like he mentioned, was there's lots of proteins, the minerals, and it's good for the feed yards. A lot of there is wet and there is dry. The dry does have a longer shelf life. The wet goes to the feedlots.
Yeah, so the corn fractionation process in these ethanol plants has really changed since the beginning of the plants starting and opening up. You were coming a lot more, we've had wet cake and that stuff for years than wet distillers, but now we're taking more of that oil out, and that's being sent either to biodiesel or also back into other feed rations. And then you're looking at the germ also being taken out. So you've got different value streams for the ethanol plants, but all those can come back into higher quality feed products when you separate those out and go into different industries as well.
So again, our resident nutritionist, tell us about some of the benefits of these next generation DDG feed products.
Well, I think as Kevin and them have discussed, the oil taken out was kind of the first step, and that's only removing part of the oil. And our data would have suggested that wet distillers grains had about 125 to 140% the energy of corn. When we take out some of the oil, we actually decrease that value by about 8%. So it doesn't make it into corn, let's say, but it does have a small depression in the energy value. And I think then feed yards have adopted and adapted to that by knowing their source. Some of these next generation ones are even a little more complicated processes. I think beef producers never thought they'd become distillers grains or ethanol plant experts, but to be honest, you're going to have to. You'll have to know what is your source, what process are they using, but we've been testing them as they get developed, and I think we'll learn more and more as the years come. I would point out that they're certainly exciting for the ethanol industry to have a high protein dry distillers grains. That increases market opportunities for them, and we can't begrudge that. But there'll always be some good stuff left for the beef cattle producers, and we obviously want to utilize those fibrous products that are kind of the left after some of those higher value products come out in the high protein distillers grain. So it'll be, if it's been confusing for beef producers in the last 15 years, hold on, but I think with the right kind of knowledge and understanding your source, we can adapt.
I think the guys that run, the feed yard, though, they've been used to adjusting rations for years. You go and take what's going to be the most efficient and what's going to be the best price product, and you adjust the rations to that. So this isn't anything new for the guys that run a feed yard. It's just adjusting to where it's coming from and knowing what product you're getting.
You're exactly right, Kevin. And then with all the things that we have to adjust for, you look at cost, and yes, we feed these products, but if they're higher cost, then you actually have to change that ration to, again, we're trying to do it to try to make money. And that's the main thing about this. And margins are tight. Margins are tight in the corn industry. Those same margins are tight in the beef industry. So we use all these things to try to maximize those benefits.
And there's a lot of research going on around this topic. I guess, Galen, I'd ask you, what is the research telling us in terms of feed intake and performance on some of these new DDG products?
Well, for the next generation ones, we've worked with a couple of what we think are the leading process manufacturers, and some of those have been adopted in plants in Nebraska and other states, but it's not real common yet, but there's a few plants operating today. And I think that when we look at some of those fiber that's mixed with the solubles or the syrup that's also in those plants, we saw surprisingly close performance to feeding regular distillers grains. Now they're going to continue to change that a little bit, and we're doing some cutting edge things or new things on evaluating that, but so far it looks fine with all of the products that are being produced, that it's still an excellent cattle feed. As Mike alluded to, that may require some adjustments depending upon how prices are, but I think we'll adapt, and it still looks positive in comparison to corn. We've tested a lot of the dry versus wet versus modified, which are kind of partially dried here in the state of Nebraska, because really we have all three. Mike's in a location where he's blessed to have really wet or modified, and we do see that by drying it takes a little bit of value out of it for the cattle, but that's necessary if you don't have a lot of cattle right next to you, and you can ship it further. It does increase shelf life, and it's still an excellent protein supplement, especially in forage fed cattle. So there's a whole lot of, this is a segment in its own on how to use distillers grains the best and what's coming. So it's a complicated issue, but we're all wising up, and I think we've learned a lot in the last 20 years. We'll just have to keep learning the next 20.
Well, so look ahead. I mean, what are those new frontiers we're exploring in terms of the net new avenues to look at relative to the efficiency of using corn and feeding cattle?
Well, we've been looking at what does this do to the sustainability picture, so doing some life cycle analyses, and as you change the process, that influences that life cycle assessment. We've also been looking at where is it most optimized, and so as I mentioned, if it's truly a protein supplement, we think that optimization's probably in growing forage fed backgrounding type cattle. In many cases, even cattle out on range, but a lot of our cow-calf producers across the country like feeding distillers grains, especially in the wintertime as a protein supplement. It's always been probably the most palatable feed you can supplement to cattle. We've joked that if you really want your cattle to come up and check them, start supplementing some distillers grains. Some people have to worry about running over them because they get in front of the wagon. It's a palatable feed once they get on it. It's great for receiving cattle. It's great for into a feed yard. We're looking at how does it interact with other ingredients. So how does it fit with Mike's operation where he's feeding high moisture corn? How does it fit with operations using dry corn? How does it fit some of our larger yards that are flaking or in the sun? So there's a whole lot of interactions and things we like to test on the use of distillers grains, and we expect more of that in the future.
Very good. Very fascinating. Have you seen some experiences right here at the yard that you'd share with us?
Well, there's change every day, it seems like, and especially here in the last couple of years, you know, in Nebraska where we had the floods and we couldn't get the Distillers grains, you have drought issues and things like that. And so, you know, you have to adjust with whatever we have, and that's where the university's been a tremendous asset to us, that they've had all these studies, you know, if you have to feed more roughage or you're trying to find roughage products. And so, you know, we adapt with all the farmers in this area. Again, you know, you look at different things and we use corn oil to try to bring that back in. Again, that's got to be on a cost. Is it paid or use that? So all these things, you know, we change our rations a lot, but they're micro changes, because the biggest, that's what you try to keep away from, is making large changes within that. And so our supply of these products and things like that, of the corn and the byproducts, have to be a consistent supply, because if you lose that and you're jumping around on your rations, that's what really hurts performance on the cattle.
Performance and health with cattle.
Exactly.
Very good. Fascinating discussion. Still to come on Cattlemen to Cattlemen, what are resources available to producers who want to improve their sustainability? We'll have insights on that question when we return.
They're here, they're hungry, and they can't be stopped with ivermectin alone. Add Safeguard when you deworm your cattle to take out resistant parasites like brown stomach worm, Cuperia, Nematodirus, and others. With 2 dewormers from 2 different classes, you can kill more resistant worms in your cattle, so you don't leave potential on the table. Consult your veterinarian for the diagnosis and treatment of parasitism. Then bite back at safeguardworks.com.
If you'd like to know more about NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen and have an opportunity to support our effort to create valuable news, information, and education just for cattle producers, then check out our website, cattlementocattlemen.org.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion about the relationship between growing corn and producing beef. We've got a set of new guests joining us now, and I'm excited to introduce them to you. First is Brandon Honeycutt. He's a Nebraska farmer who also serves on the board of the National Corn Growers Association. We're also joined by Cassie Ahern, project manager of the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium. Alongside Cassie is Jared Drenin, who manages Drenin Feedlots, our host for today's program. You know, we hear a lot about soil health these days, and I'm curious, from a corn producer's standpoint, what have corn growers done to improve soil health?
You know, when you look back at the last 20 or 30 years, you know, there's been a lot of changes in technology, whether we look at GMOs or whether we look at equipment technology that has allowed us to produce more with less, you know, using less water, using less fertilizer, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions over the years. That we just begin to see what we can do in the future and really how we can maximize our yield potential and minimize soil health destruction and really improve the soil around us.
Mm-hmm. And Jared, beef cattle producers can actually play a role in helping corn farmers improve soil health, is that right?
Yeah, you know, we can supply manure as fertilizer, which adds a lot of organic matter and humus to the soil and makes the soil tilth better. And it's a lot of micronutrients that come from the manure that really help out the crops.
So what are the tools available that producers have to really assess and help measure soil health?
You know, as we've looked over time, you know, as we mentioned technology, we're beginning to understand just how we can measure things. You know, there's soil tests out there to be able to figure out what's going on, even more so than what we used to do, just measuring NP and K, you know, just the basics of what we need. And now let's really dig into what's going on out there. Then as you see partnerships with different groups out there, that National Corn has been very, very vital in helping get going. And also we're very glad to be partners in, whether it's groups like Soil Health Partnership, Field to Market, or even more recently, more importantly as well, ESMC.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit about your organization, if you wouldn't, Cassie.
Yeah, so ESMC is a consortium of members made up of potential buyers, but as well as commodity groups and producer associations, to really bring buyers and sellers, so farmers and ranchers, to the table to sell ecosystem services, which we'll explain in a little bit. But When you talk about tools and resources for producers, for farmers and ranchers, ESMC builds upon those tools and resources to advance conservation efforts and incentivizes producers to utilize more of those tools and advance, and improve soil health on their operations.
So we were talking about sustainability in the last segment, and I'm curious, what's your take on how soil health impacts the whole sustainability of any operation? Jared?
Well, from like the feed yard standpoint, where we farm also, you can supply the fertilizer to go on your fields that you don't have to go buy synthetic fertilizer. And it's convenient for us because we can get it cleaned out of the pen and we have somewhere to go with it, and even neighbors buy it too, which helps out everybody's kind of bottom line. The better the fertilizer, the better the crop, usually.
Would you have anything to add, Brandon?
As we look at the soil health and we're looking at just the changes in the way we're planting the crop, right? We're using things like no-till, we're using things like strip-till, cover crops, any of those things that will help improve soil tilth, help with water infiltration, holding the fertilizer right where we want it. Because, the last thing we want to do as a corn farmer is to lose a vital resource that we have, a fertilizer. Not just because it's costly if we don't have the ability to use manure, but also because we want to be good environmental stewards and make sure that we're not losing stuff, whether it's into groundwater here in Nebraska, which becomes a big deal, or into surface water, which we know can also be a big deal in other parts of the United States.
Just go ahead, Jared.
And on the cover crop deal, that goes really well with the feed yard also, because we can use that for grazing calves or weaning calves out on grass and make that, and you have more refuges and stuff like that. It
creates an opportunity, some real complementarity between corn and cattle.
Absolutely.
Very good. There's a lot more to discuss about the relationship between corn and beef and the efforts to become more sustainable. We'll have more from our panel right after this.
We didn't just design the 6M tractors with you in mind. We designed them with you by our side. The new 6M tractors from John Deere, reimagined by you, for you. With improved visibility, better maneuverability, and more ways to customize, so you get everything you need and nothing you don't. Experience the new 6M at your local John Deere dealer.
Stressors that trigger bovine respiratory disease are all around. So when you spot BRD in your herd, turn to Zuprevo, the fast that lasts. Zuprevo is rapidly absorbed in as little as 45 minutes and lasts up to 28 days. Because in the race against BRD, you need to win. Ready, set, Zuprevo. In case of human injection, seek immediate medical advice. For use in beef and non-lactating dairy cattle only. For prescribing information, talk to your veterinarian or visit Zuprevo.com.
Welcome back as we continue our discussion about beef, corn, and sustainability. We hear a lot these days about the term ecosystem services, and I'm curious, Cassie, can you give us a definition of what that term really means?
Yes, so simply put, ecosystem services are the benefits that society and people obtain from the ecosystems that we're surrounded by. Looking at that a little bit further, the farmers and ranchers across the United States have really been developing ecosystem services and generating those for years and generations, but they probably wouldn't put that label on it. So when we talk about ecosystem services, we're looking at soil carbon and how much is sequestered in the ground, greenhouse gas emissions and how do we reduce those emissions, water quality impacts, water quantity impacts, and how do we conserve those. So that's, in looking at biodiversity, that's another potential as well. So when we look at ecosystem services, that's really, what we're referencing.
So Brandon, practically speaking, what does that term mean to you as a corn grower?
When we hear the term ecosystem services, a lot of times farmers think of that and they get a little glossy-eyed. They hear carbon sequestration, they hear carbon credits, they hear all these things, and they're like, all right, what does that mean? Well, we realized at NCBA, well, let's take that back down a level to soil health. And so we developed a group called Soil Health Partnership. It's 200 farmers over 16 states. It's farmer to farmer. It's data-driven. So we're really trying to develop the framework of what works in what situation. Where can we the best places for cover crops? How do we get those things together? How do we really start developing the base work for what we need to do to get to that next level. And farmers in general will really grasp onto that, because we all want to be better stewards. We want to be able to figure out how we can implement these things into our own farming operations to get to that next level. And Soil Health Partnership is one of the key components of that.
So Cassie, tell us a little bit about your organization and the goals of your organization.
Yeah, so Ecosystem Services Market Consortium, or ESMC for short, because it's a mouthful. But our mission is to advance ecosystem services, to incentivize farmers and ranchers, to improve their soil health systems, which in the end benefit society overall. We're a nonprofit organization, and one of our guiding principles is to be producer-centric. So because of that, our ultimate goal is to provide as much value back to farmers and ranchers as possible.
So Jared, I'd ask you, I mean, in what ways can beef cattle producers benefit from this program?
Well, as a beef producer who also farms, we can benefit a lot by making the soil better with all the organic matter that the manure brings to it. And the better the soil, the more carbon it pulls down out of the atmosphere, and it just makes for a better ecosystem in general, really.
And Brandon, what would you say from a corn producer's perspective?
I think a lot of this is very exciting because we're looking at the next stage of what we've been trying to do. As you just keep moving on through and say, okay, well, how can we benefit the farmers as a whole, whether it's corn guys or whether it's cattle guys? What is that next stage of a market opportunity? And we're realizing that as we understand this, we can partner with people like ESMC, we'll be able to benefit not just from a revenue standpoint, but also from the environmental standpoint, and being able to understand, more importantly, what's going on in us and around us to benefit society as a whole.
I'm curious, we talk in the beef and corn industry about freedom to operate, and when you think about the impacts and the interests that consumers and regulators have on this issue, I'm curious, how is that going to help us answer some of the questions that both of those stakeholder groups have about how we produce both corn and beef cattle? Cassie?
Yeah, so I would say I think we're all familiar with the fact that consumers are really interested in where their food comes from. So one of our goals at ESMC is to provide that transparency as to how producers are generating those ecosystem services that corporations and kind of regulatory agencies are interested in purchasing and kind of contributing to the climate mitigation and kind of overall impact.
One of the things we've seen over time is that as we partner with groups, whether it's corn and cattle, whether it's corn and environmental groups, whether it's corn and ESMC, is that we have a better voice going into whatever we're going into, whether it's political offices, regulator offices, whatever that case is, and they allow us to present a message that, no, this is not just us looking at our own farming operation, how it benefits us, but how it benefits society, how it benefits the consumers, how it benefits the end users, and it's a great grouping that we can put together from an environmental standpoint to say, hey, this is where we're at.
You deal with some regulations here running a feed yard. How do you see this helping from either a consumer or regulatory standpoint?
Well, it all mainly boils down to transparency. The more transparent you can be, the more likely your consumer is to buy your product because they trust it more. Transparency has always been a big thing in every industry, cattle, corn, anything, really.
That's a great point, and thank you all for your insights. We'll be back to wrap up this special edition of Cattlemen to Cattlemen right after this. Stay with us.
Weeds will rob me of my investments. The weeds are not palatable to cows. They will not eat them, or if they do eat them, some of them may be toxic. So there's a return on investment by allowing there to be more grass available to be grazed by the cattle.
Did you know that Prefert makes over 1,000 different farm, ranch, and rodeo items? And now, thanks to Prefert Direct, it's easier than ever before to get access to every item Prefert makes delivered direct to your local dealer. For more information about Prefert Direct, visit us at prefert.com. Prefert, America's #1 name in farm, ranch, and rodeo.
Out of the box for the Re-Ride Side of Rodeo. 3 audio books, rodeo novels by Baxter Black. A total of 23 hours following our cowboy guys and gals on the road to the finals. Rambunctious, exciting, kind-hearted, and funny, of course. $39.90. CDs or downloads, BaxterBlack.com. 800-654-2550. On the road to the rodeo, horse show, state fair, ball game, or grandma's house, climb on up and take a ride with me.
Welcome back. As we wrap up our program, I'd like to ask Brandon Honeycutt to share some final thoughts about sustainability and the value of collaboration. Brandon?
Thanks, Kevin. You know, sustainability on our farm personally, it's something that we strive to really increase on a year-to-year basis. You know, number one, we want soil health. Number two, we want to reduce our carbon footprint as a whole. Number three, we want to make sure that the kids and the grandkids and the great-grandkids can come back to the farm. So it's sustainability from that concept. But as we look at sustainability as a bigger goal throughout agriculture, you know, it's very important for us to have collaborations from a corn grower standpoint. I don't have any livestock on my farm, but we realize the value of those collaborations, whether it's with cattlemen, whether it's with environmental groups, whether it's with whoever else that at the end of the day have the same goals in mind, which are making sure that whatever we're producing, is more sustainable than it was last year, which is more sustainable than it was the year before that. And so it's always great to have these minds coming together to say, how can we work together? How can we make agriculture better? How can we leave it better for the future?
And this discussion has been a great example of just how complementary corn and cattle are and have always been, right?
Right, cattle and corn go together, you know, it's you can't have one without the other, especially here in places like Nebraska, you know, we feed right off of each other.
Thank you so much for your perspective today.
Thank you.
The National Corn Growers Association represents nearly 40,000 dues-paying corn farmers nationwide and the interest of more than 300,000 growers who contribute through corn checkoff programs in their own states. To learn more about how they're building future markets for corn, visit the website ncga.com. And don't forget, every day the NCBA staff in Washington, D.C. and in Denver is working to protect the interests of cattle producers all across the country. Join in the fight by becoming a member. Just call 866-233-3872, or you can visit the website ncba.org. Well, that wraps up this special edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. Thanks again to all of our panel members for their insights on the relationship between corn and beef. And thank you for watching. We'll see you again next week, right here on RFD TV.